We need to talk about how women who are actually making different actions, who are taking initiatives in their communities, how we need to center their voices, spotlight them, highlight their work, either as innovators or solution providers, and ensure that we are giving them the needed voice and resources that they need. And today we're going to be having this conversation. We have an amazing lineup of speakers who are going to be telling us through their works what we need to do, what has worked for them, what they have done, and how we can also go forward from here. I mean, we know when it comes to the portrayal of women and girls in the world, let's narrow it down to Africa. Yes, we know how it can be, how women can be sidelined from very salient conversations. But we're having to say in the media, we have come a long way, and we've come to salient places where we need to now start amplifying women's voices. And those of us in the climate change sector need to also do better in taking cognizance of these things and doing better in the area of what women are doing. And we have speakers who are going to be speaking to us today. And first, I would be going through their profiles so you know exactly who we're speaking to and how grounded they are in this subject matter that we're discussing today. One of our speakers, we have Amidat Abdulsalam, who is a development practitioner whose work sits at the intersection of gender equality, human rights, and climate justice. With a strong grounding in economics and advanced studies in international affairs and diplomacy, she combines research, program management, communications, advocacy, and strategic storytelling to influence policy, shift narratives, and strengthen grassroots action. Across her world, she is known for translating complex issues, climate policy, gendered risk, peace building, governance, youth development, economic justice, and ensuring people-centered solutions that amplify the voices of women, young people, frontline communities. And so far from what I've read, you can tell that this is an amazing resource person that we have lined up for this conversation today. And our other speaker, we have Imali Ngusali, who is a PhD candidate in international relations at the United States International University, and she's also a technical communications advisor at the Africa Center for Health, Climate, and Gender Justice Alliance. She has over 18 years of experience advancing sustainable development, climate justice, and gender responsive governance across 51 countries. She manages multidisciplinary teams, developing data collection and monitoring tools for the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. Her work bridges evidence, policy, and advocacy, amplifying marginalized voices and promoting sustainable and equitable societies for people. So from what we have here, you can tell that we have done our homework in ensuring that we have amazing guests who are going to be speaking to us today. So first off, I would have to call on Ms. Imali Ngusali to start her presentation. Hello, Ms. Ngusali, how are you doing today?
I'm fabulous. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Thank you very much for joining us. And I hope you've had a wonderful day so far.
Yeah, it's we're winding down. I think you are in the west of this great continent of Africa, and I'm in the east. So we're basically winding out the day.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining us. So the floor is yours now. Let's live and learn through your lens. Let's know what you know and how we need to further project and amplify women's voices in the climate change sector.
Fantastic. I did share with you my presentations. Are you able to beam them?
Yes, it will be coming up soon.
Okay, fantastic. So maybe as we wait for the slides to come through, I must say climate change disproportionately affects women. The last time I said this among journalists, they told me, how? Can you give us clarifications? Do you have statistics? What is this disproportionality? So today I came armed, but more than that, I also came with information that I'm hoping after this discussion, we'll also be able to chime in and tune in and hopefully be able to demand our rights. Today is a very epic day, not because it's a Thursday, but it's also because the day that Ghana made sure that slavery, which is one of the things that was taken out of Africa, was repatriated. And we talk about climate justice and women women, we do want to make sure that we are repatriated as individuals in our private capacity, and also because of the disproportionality that comes in with the climate injustice. So most of you would probably describe climate change in very many ways, because there are quite a number of avenues of discussing it. But most of us normally assume the UNFCCC, we normally assume the United Nations Framework for Convention for Climate Change as the prerequisite to discuss this further. And for me, I will discuss it in the lens of UNFCCC, but I will delve specifically on Article 7 and Article 8, which tackles adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage. There are quite a number of things. I'm sure when Amidat presents, you'll be able to see some of the things that I did miss on talking about. But I'm largely talking about an issue that I feel all Africans should be engaged in, because I've noticed with sincerity that the loss and damage space seems to be predominantly reviewed and also conducted by people from Global North, which begs the question is, where is this loss and damage funding literally going to? I also wanted to put to your attention, even as we wait for the slides to come on, that the loss and damage discussions are currently happening right now in Switzerland. And these discussions are basically talking about the 250 million US dollars that is supposed to be disbursed. And one of the things that as an institution that we seek to have is to make sure that this money actually gets to the Global North by reducing the amount of this money that is put on administration costs. Because if the loss and damage fund is in a foreign country and most of that money is used for administration cost, it means basically that the money that would be used to reach people who really need this money would be null and void. So without much further ado, I'll go to defining what loss and damage is. I don't know, I'm not able to see the presentation from my end. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Esther. So loss and damage is basically climate-induced loss and damage. And this basically refers to adverse effects that we can no longer adopt and we can no longer mitigate. And I will take you through something that has been prevalent across all African countries. There have been flash floods, whether in Nigeria, whether in even countries that were assumed as ASAL countries like Mali, Niger. We have had floods, even Chad, Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, Benin, even Democratic Republic of Congo. Like, we've seen floods all over, even South Africa. The rich and poor countries in Africa have all faced what we call flash floods. And for us, we normally call climate-induced flash floods. Why? Because these flash floods are coming from the greenhouse gas emission from the Global North. And because, unfortunately or fortunately, we share the same environment, the winds normally share with us the burden, and therefore we have already seen the ultrification of the climate. And I must say this, I know most of us have an idea of what climate change is, but I'm going to assume that most of us might not be aware of the difference between weather and climate change, because in some cases I've had journalists, even from the Global North, confusing it. Climate change happens after 10 years of different weather patterns. So the change is basically something that cannot be reversed, cannot be easily reversed. And that's why we're going to be experiencing sporadic droughts, and even flash floods as and when we go between now and until we transition to the next life. Let me put it as that. So maybe just sticking to these slides as a show, and after this I will ask the organizer to share with you, just in case I'm talking too fast. Climate-induced loss and damage refers to the adverse effects that we can no longer adopt and mitigate, whereby these damages and losses are unavoidable. And unfortunately, losses are permanent. For instance, you'll notice in this diagram that when you look at the losses, they include both economical losses and non-economical losses. Economical losses can be quantified, and economical losses cannot be quantified. For instance, where climate change ravages graves, you cannot quantify that. Where climate change makes girls and young women to be moved to higher grounds and they're unfortunately taken advantage of, you cannot measure that loss, because it basically means that this person has gone through multi-pronged trauma, and you cannot be able to measure that. Now, from the newly this diagram you see is as hot as this week. We were discussing the loss and damage toolkit. I don't know if any of you were part of this discussion, but from the loss and damage toolkit, these are the two main causes of loss and damage. Of course, there are quite a number, but they were clustered into two: the extreme and slow onset events. Both of these events are very hazardous, because the slow onset events come up with things like rising water levels, where, as I mentioned to you, in ASAL countries, which initially in the last 10 or 20 years could not get floods, are now being flooded, but they're also experiencing something called rising water levels. In the case of Kenya, which borders Ethiopia from the north, we are having rising water levels from the Omo River, which emanates from Ethiopia. And we've been able to see Omo River rising in various countries, literally almost cutting our country almost by a quarter from the northern side. And we've seen this being able to sink a whole village, which includes loss of damage of institutions like schools, churches, and even we had a situation whereby rising seawater levels literally wiped away people who have never been found today. So you can imagine that in terms of slow onset. And this, of course, has been provoked by climate-induced provocations from the changes. And then you'll also see on the extreme weathers, we have drought, storms, heat waves, tropical storms, extreme floods. We also saw the cyclone Cyclone Idai and Cyclone Kenneth in Mozambique, where over 600,000 people have never been found to date. And we also saw the ravaging floods that happened recently. So I think if you just have a quick view of what has happened in Africa for the last 2 years, you'd be able to attest that indeed extreme events and slow onset events have literally changed the whole scope of even how we do farming, how women live, and actually it even now is dictating where should women live, so that they don't have to be moved because of intense climate changes. Please move on to the next slide. So in the next slide, you'll see the clustering of both economic and non-economic. So you see the types, you see the quantification of the economic ones and non-economic, and you see the overlap in between. So as I mentioned before, where you can be able to quantify, usually these things are clustered as economics, but also there are some non-economics that can be quantified. For instance, if there's loss of life in terms of numbers, like what I mentioned in the case of Mozambique, where we saw over 600,000 people, that's over 600,000 human resource, African resource that has vanished just like that. That's over 600,000 lives, families, children, potential journalists, change makers, or who knows, maybe the president of the world in the next 10 years vanished like that just because of climate change. You also see in terms of income. Now, most of the countries really focus on the income point of view because it directly affects the GDP and even the status of a country. But the non-economic is equally quintessential because it affects not only the livelihoods, but also the trauma, whereby a whole generation can be halted by the fact that they experience intense climate change. And one of the things that you'll note, I will just highlight from this slide, is that you see the disproportionality of women, because in many cases, we've seen over the population that has been either displaced by climate change, that has either faced direct challenges. It includes over 70%, and these are just by estimation. In terms of, if we look at by population in Africa, it actually comes to almost 80%. However, we need statistics to actually measure that, so that when somebody is able to ask us for data, they can actually go online. Hopefully, we look forward to work with the United Nations Disaster Risk response, so that we're able to have all this data cross-cutting in all countries. Please move on to the next slide. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to jot them down in the chat. I'm happy to note, but in the interest of time, I'm going now to do a very quick dry run. So the unjust burden of climate change is the fact that it affects women and girls disproportionately. But this does not mean that it does not affect men. It's just that for men, whenever it comes to things like being moved to a higher level ground, most of them might not face the multiple challenges like women, whereby if you move to a higher ground and there's no protection in terms of security, you could end up being a victim of sexually gender-based violence. We've seen episodes among different African countries. I won't go in specific a name, but we've seen situations whereby women have to be moved from a place that has been flooded overnight, and the rescuers are not concerned about the health and well-being of women and girls. We've seen actually young girls disappear even from rescue missions, and this in itself means that whenever there is climate change and whenever there's loss and damage, climate-induced loss and damage, then it means women and girls' lives continues to be severely impacted. Now, we've been able to document this in terms of our advocacy and activism on loss and damage. I'm happy to share the links afterwards, but I'm also happy to go deeper in terms of the unjust burden. If you go to the next slide, please, because we clustered them into different thematic areas. One of the most shocking ones was the femicide. We've seen accelerated cases of femicide. And for most of you who are aware, we've seen this cross-cutting, not just in Kenya, but even in West Africa, especially in Mali. We saw this also in bits of the northern bit of Nigeria, even in Niger. We've seen quite a number of cases. But this particular diagram only focuses on the femicide cases in Kenya, because what happened was when we linked this with climate change from 2023 to 2025, and we've seen the correlation of both, which means that climate-induced loss and damage accelerates femicide. How? The loss of livelihoods makes women and girls look for alternative ways of earning income, and most of them have had to go online, and thereby being prey from quite a number of things. Now, I will not go deep to just tell you how vicious the online cycle is, but I know most of you have been using products from the global north, including ChatGPT, AI products, and some of these products, they normally keep your contacts, and some of you have even gone ahead and purchased the higher versions of these products. Now, what you don't know is that by purchasing these things, there's somewhere that your data is sent, and people can actually stalk you online. People can actually take your face and put it on a naked woman's body and create a TikTok video and earn out of that. People can take your data and impersonate you. These are the things that unfortunately we are not told. People can lure you and tell you that by engaging in by engaging in online things, they can lure you and eventually kill you and even take your inner organs. That's how the correlation was done. But the study here basically talked about the statistics of women who were murdered. Of course, femicide is women who've already passed on, in relation to the climate stressors, as you will see on the x-axis. And this study, we have it. I'm happy to share it with you after this iteration. If we could go on to the next slide. So the other thing that I also wanted to highlight is the SGBV cases. So I won't go so much onto this, but I will just mention that for us in Kenya, femicide has become a national emergency because of the accelerated cases of women and girls being killed. And these are not women who are in the village or rural areas only. We've seen women who are from high learning institution, university, international university, and also domestic universities. We had over 930 cases of femicide. Last year, women actually went out to talk about this, and it became a national emergency. So I just want to highlight that climate change, climate-induced loss and damage has a very strong correlation on SGBV. Please, let's move on to the next slide. Then I also wanted to mention the fact that children are more at risk. As an institution, we don't talk on behalf of children. We actually let the children talk about climate change with their own mouths. And here is our child ambassador who talked about the way climate shocks, of course, had a reverberation effect of hunger, displacement, and early marriage. And from her mouth, she was able to articulate how climate-induced loss and damage has even traumatized her, that she could not be able to go to school. In her case, she also talked about a 15-year-old who, because of climate change, her father literally sold her to an older man so that they could get income. And because she had refused to be married to this person, she was found dead. That's how drastic climate change can because of the repercussion it has on livelihoods. Please let's go to the next slide. I'll try to move a bit fast in the interest of time. Please feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to answer afterwards. Then, of course, we talked about climate change and indigenous people. Most indigenous people in Africa as a whole normally depend on natural means of survival. And when climate change occurs, it basically ruins not only the ecosystem, but also makes them displaced. Like we've seen so many cases of this. In this case, Achga worked with indigenous people, but in Brazil, because we wanted to see what the government has done, especially to save the Amazon. And that is something that we are also trying to replicate here at home. Now, the unfortunate thing is that most indigenous people do not articulate their issues in, can I say, the colonial languages like French, English, and Portuguese. So some of them, whenever they report about the ills of climate change, they are misrepresented, or sometimes some of these cases are underreported. And for us as Achga, it's something that we intend to do, and we hope that the journalists in the house will take note and hopefully do epic stories on this so that they can give dignity to these women. Please, let's move on to the next slide. The other thing that I think I also wanted to talk about climate change and its direct impact on women, but in correlation to biodiversity, is the changes of the pigmentation. Now, most people don't take a note of this, but for women, I think I might, if I highlight this, you'll be able to understand it in retrospect of even how you use cosmetics and also how your skin can change because of climate change, literally. So in our case, we are literally doing a study, and we noticed that in Nakuru, you see the difference of the flamingos on the right and on the left. Initially, we used to have pink flamingos in Lake Nakuru here in Kenya, and they used to give us a lot of yield in the tourism industry. Unfortunately, this has been thwarted because of the changes of the pH and the salinity of the water. Now, the water, because of the climate change and the rising water levels from Omo River that flows from Ethiopia and percolates through Baringo and now has gone even through Lake Nakuru, the water, the salinity of the water has changed, and it has depleted something called the spirulina algae. This algae is very critical for the flamingos because the flamingos would ingest that, and it would make sure that they sustain the pink pigmentation. Unfortunately, this has changed severely, and it has hurt the ecosystem. And also, we've seen a change on the teeth color. The teeth, I'm literally pointing at mine, because we've seen changes of teeth color among women who live in Nakuru because of the changes of the salinity of water. We haven't done an extensive study to see how this affects the skin, but definitely if the salinity of water can affect flamingos, it is likely going to affect the skin. So I think we might actually need to do a study on climate-induced loss and damage on African skins, but I'll leave that for later. So maybe we can move on to the next slide. I'm really in cognizance of time, and I'm really sorry if I'm talking too fast, but please feel free to chat me after this. Climate-induced RAMCA. So RAMCA is basically reproductive, maternal, neonatal, child, and adolescent health. And all of these are affected in different ways. For instance, just on reproductive health alone, it means that whenever there is flooding, women who may not want to have unintended pregnancies might actually have these pregnancies because they're not able to get the EPUs if hopefully they're engaging in maybe sexual relations. Again, just that on reproductive health only, whenever there's climate change, it means that women who are in their productive age, they cannot get prenatal and postnatal care. Again, on the same, just on reproductive health alone, we've seen an altercation of the oxidation processes of the combined oral pills and the prostrogen only pills, whereby some of these pills that were intended to help women in their reproductive age have actually been altered and now cause thrombosis and even lead to blood clots and death. That's how severe climate shocks have dismantled reproductive. I've just talked about the reproductive bit. I've not gone to maternal and child and neonatal and adolescent and nutrition, but there's a correlation on the same. What I can say is that heat stress and it really destroys the infrastructure, the health systems and infrastructure. And this in itself has a very strong correlation on climate-induced disruption. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So yeah, so also on diagnostics and treatment, we've seen changes on diagnostics, and maybe I can just quickly mention this. I really want to save more time for Amidat because I saw her presentation and it's really, really good. But I will rush through and say this, that climate change has really impacted Africa severely because we normally depend on drugs from foreign countries. When these drugs come to Africa, there's a way they're supposed to be put. Some they're not supposed to be put in a very heat-stressed places because those drugs, they alter the oxidation process. Not only alters, but the formula of that drug alters. Now, when you are diagnosed and you are given a drug that has already gone through heat stress, that drug that might not heal you or might not be useful to you because of the fact that it can actually cause antimicrobial resistance in your system, but just by ingesting that. We have also seen drugs hindering climate change, hindering curation because of the ultraification of these drugs. We need actually to publish more data on this in relation to malaria, whereby we've seen many African countries that are using malaria drugs, that these drugs do not no longer cure the malaria as it used to 10 or 20 years ago because of the ultraification of that. The other thing is the sprout of something called PRNDS. PRNDS are poverty-related and neglected diseases, which include but not limited to cholera, leishmaniasis, dysentery, diarrhea. Of course, whenever there is rising water levels, it basically sweeps also the sewer. And when the sewer system comes up, it mixes with the water that you use for cooking. And that directly impacts the patient as well. Even though you give them drugs, they will still go back to an ecosystem that has water that is already destroyed. So that in itself really messes up the immune system of not just the patient, but also of the patient, of the families that were not sick in the first place. So I think that in a nutshell kind of explains the diagnostics and treatment, and of course the oxidation process, and of course the disease challenges that you are facing. You will notice that actually malaria right now, of course, there are so many conspiracy theories on the kind of a mosquito that is around Africa. But also, if you look at the treatment process, we actually need to review those drugs and change and see whether they have been altered because either of heat stress, either of being mixed with other materials, and also because of climate change, to ascertain that African countries are not getting drugs that actually harm the people rather than cure them. Please, let's go to the next slide. So I think if you look at the different thematic areas, I've tried to tease out how the disproportionality of climate change affects women. And one of the things that I wanted to show you is that this picture, it was taken in Marsabit County. It's one of the largest counties here in Kenya. It's actually bigger than Burundi and Rwanda. No offense to those countries. It's bigger than Burundi and Rwanda combined, and a bit of Uganda. Uganda people, forgive me. I know that you're our neighbors, but small is I'm just trying to use your country to show you how vast climate change has been. So that county, Marsabit County, is actually one of the hottest counties to live in. Unfortunately, rising water levels, this is not flood, this is rising water levels from beneath. And that tells you that the rising water levels that are that are slow sets because of climate change affects people. It literally wiped away a whole village. This is actually one of the buildings that was salvaged. And by salvaged, I mean this is one of the buildings that stood strong. And this, you can see the water is 3/4 of the church. And you see children at the corner of this. And it just tells you that climate change in Africa has brought severe loss and damage. And it is quintessential for us to actually understand this, so that when people go to Switzerland, like right now people are in Switzerland discussing our future without us, we go online and make noise and ask those people that they should not be discussing about loss and damage without our voices, because we are the ones who are severely impacted. And I'm not saying this to entice people, but I just want to tell you, where there is a will, there's a way. If Ghana made UN realize that we were robbed of our dignity years ago, we should make the global north to give us that money as it is whole, so that it doesn't pay people salary who are already in the global north. Please, let's go to the next slide before I become an activist and eat all your time. So for us, we really want everybody to be aware of what's happening. We want to have a just movement. A just movement is where people know information and they're able to articulate it, and they know their rights and demand for it. Because there is no point for us talking and exchanging information, talking about how we've helped a policy, but you're not seeing the outcomes. And therefore, as we want to start an African revolution whereby all voices, especially the ones that have been suffering loss and damage, we make these people pay. If people can afford billions to spend on bombs, then they can definitely spend some of that money in the climate-induced change, which was caused by the very industries that they're using to choke us. Please, let's go to the final slide. Yeah, I'm taking a hold of now, and I really look forward to talking with you, discussing with you. I'm sorry if I was talking too fast. I really wanted to make room for Amidat because she has a very brilliant presentation, and I would love for her to present before I tackle your questions. I'm handing over to Esther, but I'm not leaving this call. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Imali. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, you touched on so many things. You talked about girl-child education, talked about maternal mortality as well. You also touched on loss and damage. And these are some of the areas where, you know, sometimes as journalists over time, because you're reporting in a particular thematic areas, you just develop a blind spot to some other areas until we have conversations like this that now get to remind you of the existence and the intersection of climate change in some of these other areas. And this is why conversations like this are very, very important. Thank you so much. I mean, your slides, 100. Thank you so much. And now we'll be having Amidat come up. Miss Amidat Abdisalam, you'll be coming up for your presentation. And of course, I know grounded, solid professional. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Esther. Can you confirm if you can hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. I can.
All right, great. Honestly, I am very glad that Imali presented first because it seems like she has set the pace and, you know, grounded us in such solid foundation that I would just have to build on now. But through a discussion, one thing that just stood out for me as always is just reiterating that climate change primarily is multifaceted, it is multidimensional, and it must be treated as such. We simply cannot just treat it as an environmental issue. Both the gender dimension of it and other intersectional dimension of it, it is highly, highly multidimensional. Thank you all. I hope we are all doing well from everywhere that we are joining from. I hope this conversation so far has been going well. One thing I don't like, especially in spaces like this, is when only the speakers are talking and everywhere is quiet. Please, before we proceed, very quickly in the chat box, can all our participants just take out 30 seconds, 1 minute? How has this session been so far? It can be in just one word. Please, let's see that we're actually following and it's not just a one-end conversation. Please, I would really love for us to see. Esther, I don't know if you can keep an eye out for the chat box.
Okay.
Just want to see how is it going so far. If you have anything that is running through your mind at this very moment concerning everything that has been said so far, if it's just one word as to how this whole conversation has gone, you know, that would be really nice to see. I see eye-opening. Okay, that's from Esther. All right.
Yes, we have insightful, thought-provoking from Lilies as well.
Okay, that's great. Now I'm glad. I'm happy to see that we are following and this conversation. So because we've gone far already, I'm not going to start with all the basics again because I want to believe Imali has set a pace for me to follow, which I'm very glad for, by the way. But this I'm just going to go on with this, and I want us to keep that in mind very quickly. Please, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen, please, before I proceed?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. This thought, I would like us to just run it through our minds very quickly. Because of time, we'll not answer it, but please let's just keep it in mind. In one way or another, have you seen someone, or maybe yourself, ever affected by flooding, droughts, extreme heat, or food insecurity, or any other climate challenges that you might have seen? You can just say yes or no in the chat box if you've ever seen that. But going ahead very quickly is the concept of climate change versus climate justice, which I think is very important. Imali already mentioned about what climate change is, the long-term change in weather patterns and every other thing in between. But as journalists, as media specialists, advocates, activists, whatever it is that we are, I think it's important that we focus more on climate justice, because now climate justice basically is this big idea that combines several small ideas about fairness and equality in the way we handle our planet's changes. I love to put it that way very briefly. And climate justice is this human-centered approach to the climate crisis that it frames the global warming and everything they are facing more than an environmental issue. It sees it as an ethical issue, a political issue, a social development issue, rather than just an ecological one. And this is where it highlights how, like Imali said, least developed countries, the global south, low-income countries, the Black, indigenous, people of color, developing nations often suffer the worst disproportionate impacts while having contributed the least to climate change. Also, there are some of the key aspects of climate justice, which include equity and accountability, rights-based approach, fair participation, addressing root causes. And there are also different forms of justice, which is some distributive justice, sharing the burden, all through the UNFCCC frameworks, the Paris Agreement, a whole lot as has always in different articles. There are the clauses of the developed countries providing support for the least developed countries who have been more affected by the impacts of climate change. Even though the dimensions of these fundings and supports are not primarily coming the way they should, because most times they come in forms of loans rather than grants or supports, but those clauses are still there. There's the procedural justice, recognitional justice, restorative justice, and every other thing in between. So please, as media practitioners, as activists, advocates, when we look at the issue of climate change, after the change, let us always permanently keep in mind the justice aspect of it. Like it has been said also, climate change primarily is a threat multiplier. One thing or the other thing that has happened in the space of climate change, or for everything that occurs, is directly or indirectly proportional to another thing. If you think of one problem, I promise you there is like 10 other problems that would surely arise from that one problem that has come up because of a climate crisis. And climate change worsens existing insecurity. And it worsens. It is now worse on women because of the existing inequalities. Like we already know, without dwelling into that too much, we live primarily in a very much patriarchal society. There are gender dynamics, there are power dynamics, there are existing inequalities. And because of climate change, these inequalities are worsened. These power dynamics are now giving room for disproportionate impacts of climate change on women, girls, and other vulnerable groups. So what this means automatically is it is not black or white, and it is not a one-way road matter. So when we are handling this or reporting it, as the case may be, we can't just focus on one dimension of it. We need to look at all the multidimensional aspects of it, both in the reporting stage, in advocacy, in policy level, and every other level. And why does gender matter in climate change? Because gender determines the access to resources, exposure to risk, decision-making power, and around the world, it's numerous research has already shown that women are 80 times more likely to die during climate-related disasters more than men, simply because of the same existing inequalities. And like like I said, Imali has done a lot of work ahead of me. She has also mentioned that climate change increases gender-based violence, it increases poverty rates, it worsens health. It's a whole lot. We are going to get into it, but that's just climate change and gender nexus. And like also Imali said, which I also like, we are not saying climate does not affect men. All we are saying is it affects women disproportionately. It affects both gender, but it affects one gender more than the other because of existing inequalities. I think that is as simply as I can put it. But moving forward, now, what is climate reporting? Because we are actually here to talk more about reporting climate through a gender lens. So more broadly, I think I'll just go to the climate change reporting in journalism, particularly now. It's the specialized practice of covering the scientific, political, social, and economic aspect of the global crisis. Like I earlier said, we must see that climate change is beyond an ecological or scientific issue and look at all the other multi-social development dimensions of it and make sure to report it in those ways. And it translates complex climate science into accessible information, highlighting local impacts, policy debates, and solutions. Now, this is more important. So you are blending data journalism with human interest stories. More important, the human angle of things is what we should be more concerned about. As much as the scientific aspect of it is important, we must, it's not a suggestion, it is what we must do, is report the human angle of it. And while reporting the human angle of it, it means we have considered all the multi-dimensions that of the tools that climate crisis has taken over a community in Nigeria and across Africa. So what does reporting from a gender lens mean? Generally or traditionally, when you're reporting climate problems, it focuses on, the emissions that happen, the science, the policy, and this is often gender blind. So gender responsive reporting includes whose voices are heard, who is most affected in this community that this crisis has happened, what is the power dynamics of this community. That would also determine the outcome of the crisis, because primarily after this flood, for example, has happened in this community, let's take, for the Nigerians here, I'm sure we remember the Mokwa flood in Niger State. After the Mokwa flood has happened, for example, the flood has ended, people have died, people have been displaced. That is when the real problem starts for many vulnerable groups, including women. The flood itself is it's almost like the tiniest bit of it. It has become very minute. The smallest bit of it is now the actual flood that has happened. What now matters is what happens afterwards. So imagine now coming into this community, wanting to report this, maybe for the media, for government stakeholders, or for anyone. And the only thing I'm coming to say is, oh, okay, a flood has happened here, people are out of their homes, and that's it. I've not captured anything. I've not said any human angle story. I've not brought in the concept of intersectionality of climate justice or looked at this climate crisis through a gender lens. So instead of saying the flood destroyed lands, what framing a gender perspective to climate reporting would look like is saying something like, flood has displaced women farmers with limited land ownership and no access to recovery funds. Their husbands now have to migrate in this land to another land to find greener pastures, leaving them here more open to harm, more open to gender-based violence, and every other thing in between. That way, I am capturing the differences in the gender dynamics in the society, and also capturing the different ways in which these crises have affected the community members. So I'm not just coming to say, oh, okay, the flood has happened, these people are dead, or these people are out of their homes. I'm now putting an intersectional lens into the work that I am doing and what I am producing. And what that means is that if this kind of reporting keeps coming out, if it is going to influence policy or determine what outcomes will be, surely they can now see that, even policymakers can now see, I will not have any other choice than to say, these things were reported this way. that means we have to tackle it or make policies that will address these issues this way as well. So some of the gendered impacts of climate change in Nigeria. First off, before I proceed, I'd like to say that these issues is almost as if it's the same all around Africa, to be fair. Imali has said so much, and absolutely everything she said resonates with me as a Nigerian. It's absolutely the same everywhere. The patriarchal system, the power dynamics, the inequalities are the same, and they're just small cultural differences here and there, but broadly they are very much the same. And in Nigeria, particularly somewhere like the southeast region, many women are not allowed to own lands. So imagine this kind of women facing agricultural or food insecurity because of climate change, and primarily you're already not allowed to own land. So now how do you even want to recover or get something doing for yourself when this kind of issues occur? Now they are losing their livelihood, they're having increased poverty, and starting all over is even more difficult for them because of the existing inequality. Not to dwell much on all of that, and also water scarcity and care burden. In many communities, women are primary water collectors. In many rural communities, they go longer distance to get water. And what does this mean? If I'm going 10 kilometers to fetch water in a day, automatically I'm not going to school. I don't have time to actually engage myself in paid work, labor, or work care. And now I am more exposed to to danger, to gender-based violence along the road. My life itself is at risk. So when I'm coming into the community to report this kind of crisis, I simply cannot just say this community no longer have access to water because of drought or desertification. I have not captured anything. I have to talk about that girl who could no longer go to school because she has to go 10 kilometers to fetch water, or that girl who a family is planning to marry out off at the age of 14 just for them to get extra income because the climate crisis has displaced them and now they no longer have a source of livelihood. These are real life stories of people, and we need to report them from the human angle of things. And we always need, it can't be a second thought. We must always put these into consideration when we are talking about these climate issues. Also, gender-based violence, sexual violence, early marriage, like I said, exploitation. You see cases of women having to exchange sex for food in IDP camps that they have to move to because they have been displaced from their communities. I've done a lot of research on that, and the women in these IDP camps, when you interview them for research purposes, they tell you, oh, sometimes even the camp coordinators who are supposed to look after them would still not want to give them the food for free. They want something else in return. And if you ask them more deeply, why did you leave your home in the first place? Oh, farmers herders conflict. Why did the farmers herder migrate to their town to begin with? Because of drought and desertification in their own towns. It is simply one thing leading to another. Like I said, it is multidimensional, it is multifaceted. Peace building, insecurity, migration, everything, health. The impacts are multidimensional, and we must look into all of these multidimensional aspects. And over 55% of women reported increased violence linked to climate stress. So the risk of domestic violence, sexual violence, femicide, like Imali said, has also increased because of the climate stress. So we cannot turn a blind eye to just want to report these cases as if it's just one-way traffic. It really is not, and we have to report it exactly the way it is. We have to always put the human angle of things into consideration. Like I earlier said, disruption of education as well. Up to 65% of girls drop out due to climate and conflict crisis, and the health impact is endless. Malnutrition, poor maternal health, even infertility, disease exposure, even menstrual health, menstrual hygiene, all of these issues, they now still arise more because of the climate crisis. So if I have been displaced, take the Niger Delta, for example, in Nigeria, a recent report that I'd read had said that it now shows that because of the oil spill and all the harmful toxins that it has released into the atmosphere, women as low as the age of below 30 now face higher risk of infertility. There's now an increased case of infertility in the women because of the oil spills. And it's not just infertility, even now there's now cases of early menopause and all of these things, poor maternal health. If the hospitals has taken away, or if the floods has taken away the hospital structures and every other thing, where are they going to get maternal health? Where would they even do antenatal, or how would they say they want to give birth? Or is it me that I've been displaced by flood? How do I want to think of pads to get my menstruation or every other thing in between? So we must always put all of these considerations in mind whenever we want to tell a climate story or report a climate event. Also, like I mentioned, conflicts and insecurity, banditry, farmers-elder clashes in Nigeria, displacement, sexual violence, loss of livelihoods. And why does gender responsive reporting matter? The stereotypes are already there, the biases are already there. It is now left to us to make sure that we challenge these biases. And we are not going to do that just by our mouth. We must do that through our stories. Storytelling is very important, and it is not something that should be taken lightly. We are here now as a result of the stories that we've been told over the years. Whether it is accurate or inaccurate, it has cautiously or subconsciously shaped who we are, shaped how we reason, shaped the things that we do, the things we consume, the things we put out there, and even the things we put back into our work. So we must always remember that we hold a very strong force as storytellers, and make sure that the stories that we are telling or the reports that we are giving are coming from a human angle and are human-centered. It is also the only way that we can amplify local voices. If we don't actually tell the stories of these indigenous communities through a gender lens or through an intersectional lens, then what are we actually saying? It means we are just coming in and going out, maybe just to tick a box or something. It is also a matter of justice. More importantly, beyond any other thing, it is a matter of justice. It improves quality of education. It promotes safety and respect. And like I said earlier, there would also be better policy outcomes when there are better stories coming out from communities regarding the climate crisis and the impacts of this crisis. And like Imali also said, after adaptation, after mitigation, there's also the loss and damage part of it. We must always consider these things when we are telling our stories. What can now be done for the people of this community, for the women of this community, to ensure that this thing will not happen again? It is part of the reporting. How are they adapting, or how are they managing this crisis that has already occurred? It is also part of the reporting. And what are those things that can no longer be adapted or mitigated over? That is the loss and damage aspect. It is also part of reporting, and it is just as important as every other thing. It also ensures fair representation. It ensures that not only one voice from the community is being heard. It's one thing that a crisis has happened in this community. Now, let's say, for instance, the Ayutthaya community in Ondo State that increasingly have increased sea level because of the Atlantic Ocean constantly taking over their lands and taking over their land. Is one thing that children in that community can no longer go to school because their school structures have worsened. It's another thing that people are running away from this sea levels rising. It's another thing that a blind pregnant woman, which is another dimension, the aspects of other vulnerabilities like disability, is another thing that the same way a blind pregnant woman will feel that impact or will want to adapt to that impact is not the same way another woman who is not even blind will adapt to that impact. So as much as we are thinking of just reporting, we must look at the gender lens of it. We must look at all the intersectional lens of it. We must look at all the vulnerability lens of it. These are very, very important. And more importantly, now, what are some of the gaps that I have personally noticed or that has been noted around Africa in climate reporting, lack of disaggregated data. If there's one problem Nigeria has, if it is left to one problem, it is surely the problem of data. I don't know about other African, I can't say for Kenya particularly, but in Nigeria, one thing we surely have is a data problem. There is no data anywhere. And even the ones you see are never accurate. And when you still get the data, they are not disaggregated, they are just general random data. So because we lack this disaggregated data, we need to now actually find a way to work around this and also keep advocating for the inclusion of disaggregated data. And even in the little set of our reporting, try to separate these data from one another. Also, the invisible gendered impact of conflicts. Many times we tend to turn, is it turn a blind eye or choose not to see, I don't know, of this conflicts. We miss reporting how specifically these issues affect women, including risk during food gathering, like I had earlier said, increased violence and economic vulnerability. Also, neglecting gender-based violence. We cannot take one out of the other. We need to also look at all of these lens. Also, limited focus on women as agents of change. This is very important because more often than not, we tend to see women as just the victims, not the people who are using indigenous knowledge to adapt to the changes that has occurred, not the people who are bringing in new innovations, not the people who are standing up to challenge policies, not the people who want to be involved in decision making. We need to stop reporting women as just victims, but as leaders and innovators that are going to engage in climate adaptation and sustainable agriculture and conservation practices. Also, like earlier said, patriarchal norms and resource. And also one thing that is not here is the need of us, should I say advocates, reporters, journalists, to feel like the savior. I don't know, sometimes we have this tendency of going into the community and just feeling like, oh, I have come to solve your problem. Just tell me your story. And when you get the story, you want to tell it in the most panache way as possible. You want to tell it in the most sophisticated way as possible. You know, use all the big English, make it worldwide standard, while now leaving out all the lived experiences of these women. Sometimes it takes you reporting these events verbatim for you to actually get a gender lens out there. It's never about us. It is always going to be about the people who have been impacted by this. We are only there simply as a messenger. So let's not confuse our roles. Our role is very much important, but it does not supersede the actual experiences of these people. We can't take out these experiences to make our content or our publication sound posh or whatever. So we also need to keep putting this into consideration. And finally, climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is social, political, and deeply gendered. And how we choose to report it shapes how we are going to solve it. Like I said, the beginning of many things that we hold on dear to, both in religion, for those who hold on to that dearly, in society, in politics, are simply stories and how they have been told to us. Literally everything, it is how they have been told to us. So whether it's turned out for the good or for the bad, it is simply how they have been told to us. So unless we start making sure that we tell these stories from a human angle, from an intersectional lens, from a gendered lens, we are not going to move any further with climate justice. And climate justice is a must. Climate justice is gender justice. Climate justice is social justice. Climate justice is human rights. And that is that. And I hope my presentation has complemented everything that Imali has said earlier. And I also deeply hope that this session has encouraged you to question the narratives we often accept and be more intentional about how we center voices in climate conversation and every other social development issue as the case may be. Thank you very much. And I hope that was worth your time.
All right, thank you very much, Miss Abdusalam, and that was just so amazing. Thank you very much. Touching on all the areas, really, and when we get to talk about climate change, a lot of people just want to wait until, or I recall a particular example. I used to be on radio at the time when it happened in Benue State, I think in 2023, and a lot of other people who lived in other states just could not connect to everything that the people who live there were going through. And for every one person who experienced any kind of climate issues going on, there were so many other people whose voices were not heard, who were not granted interview, or they suffered it differently. Now, from what you have said, there are people who live with some form of disabilities as well, who we may not have taken into cognizance their own nuanced experience. So we might just be talking to people generally and say, oh, people in this community have suffered from this action that's happened to the climate or whatever at the time, but we're not having to break it down into sections to say, oh, this affects you this way, or this has happened to you this way, which is something that I'd like to urge us as journalists or people who are just interested in understanding how this space works to be more interested and pay more attention to this. So yeah, it's a wake-up call for all of us. The conversations that we've had today, from Imali speaking to Miss Amida speaking as well, it's just all of us having to put on our thinking caps. Some of the ideas we've gotten here from conversations, you're probably thinking what your next big story is going to be. I'll be glad to read it, actually. So it's time for us to get our hands in the mud and start working. So if you have questions, please, you can put your hands up and the mic will be yours, and we get to address your questions and concerns. If you have questions tailored or directed at one of the speakers specifically, you can put it in the chat box as well if you don't want to speak for yourself. Conversations like this, access to experts like this, is for us to be able to ask questions and be sure of what we know, update ourselves on information that we had. I mean, some of the things that they had said on this call, I didn't know them beforehand, or I had maybe rationalized information about it. All right, I can see Helen's hand up. Helen, you have the mic.
Thank you so much, Esther. I have a question in regards to reporting energy issues, especially those that affect women. If either of the two speakers can share how best, or the gaps that they see journalists missing out when it comes to reporting energy on a gender lens, we'll appreciate that.
Okay, so which of the speakers would you want to answer your question so we can just direct it to them?
Either of them, whoever will go first, I'll appreciate. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Helen.
All right, I mean that you're ready to go. Imali, get ready.
All right. Thank you so much, Helen. So energy issue is not standalone, or is not separate from other climate issue. It is also a whole part of it. And it always boils down to the existing inequalities. It always boils down to the power structures. It always boils down to how the society already functions. And so when we even talk about energy poverty or energy transitioning, and you get into the community and you want to report these energy issues, primarily in many, let me use the Nigerian example now, in many Nigerian communities, many rural Nigerian communities, very much urban too, but let's say rural communities, women are the primary people who cook in the household. They are primarily the ones who nurture the household. They're primarily the ones who take care of children. So now if we are talking about, let's say, energy transition, what does that look like for a woman who cooks with firewood? What does that look like for a woman who goes long distance to find firewood to cook with? Does she even have the economic power to purchase an electric cooking stove? Or does she have the skill, or even the time to learn the skill of how to make use of briquettes as an alternative to using firewood to cook? So these are some of the things that you look into. What time does she have amidst all our should I say, social or cultural responsibilities to join that capacity building training that you want to give to women on using briquettes to cook in the community? When does she actually have the time to sit and join you for that? Will her husband allow? That's another dimension. So when you get to communities and you want to, you can't just you can one mistake we must never do is sit and want to think for them. Don't, please, let's not never do that. Let them sit with them, have these conversations with them. So on a daily basis, how do you cook? How long does it take you to get firewood? Do you have access to power in this household? When there is no power supply, NEPA, like we call it in Nigeria, and the heat is intense, does that change the mood of your husband? Does he act more violent towards you because he just cannot stand the heat and you're now just, everything is just irritating to anybody or to everybody, but surely he can take it out on you? Does that happen to you? How do you plan to cope with these issues? So these are some of the multifaceted issues that happens and that we must put into consideration when addressing issue or even issues of poverty. So when we want to advocate for them or to ask or even seek advocacy or help or interventions, we must also sit them and ask what they need. You've heard their stories, but what you think might be the solution to this energy poverty or this energy problem, or what you think might foster energy transition in this community might not be what they want or what they need. In your mind, you can just think, okay, let's get them solar panels, and who knows, that might solve the problem of this community. But the women might tell you that, oh, this is not exactly what we need right now. What I want is a clean cooking stove, or what I want is something else. So hearing from them, but also having the context and the background to put whatever they are saying into actual context based off the higher knowledge that you hold is also very important. And Helen, I hope I have been able to answer your question if it's...
Yeah, I'd like to chime in a bit. Sorry, I'd like to chime in a bit because this issue is really, really hot. I was actually talking to some experts who normally give energy to Africa, and I think we are actually on the verge of a very big crisis, especially because of the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. Most developing countries, Kenya, Mauritius, South Africa, Uganda, normally get our LPG imports from the MENA region. It might not necessarily be from Iran, but Saudi Arabia and all these countries, we've seen that some of their energy industries have been already bombed. So we're looking at a potential crisis. And even the women who are in this call, you might actually be needing the firewood in future if this war does not come to an end. For instance, the cost of LPG gas might actually quadruple because you already see the shortage of diesel and kerosene, which would be alternative. Unless our governments are able to boost our electricity, maybe we might now be forced to look at other alternative ways of even cooking. One of the things that I wanted to highlight, like it is estimated that the imports in Kenya might actually increase to 40%. Of course, we do have a regulatory body that has stated that they have been able to make sure that the prices will not increase until the 15th of April next month. But we're already seeing some shortages, and this might have a reverberation effect on the prices of commodities, including the cost of food. So I think if you are reporting on this, it's very easy to link it to the current war. And of course, what does the closure of Strait of Hormuz mean for Africa? The only country that I think has been able to insulate itself is likely China, that maybe has reservoirs for maybe a year. And of course, we know that they already also have been able to tap to their energy. So unless we diversify, it seems that we might actually be heading towards an energy crisis. So peradventure that you're living in Africa and you have some extra money, please don't buy new clothes and new shoes. Instead, invest maybe in an extra cylinder and maybe some kerosene until maybe the war in Iran stops. These are just my 2 cents. But maybe next month, if we have such a call, I'll have more statistics and I'll be able to warn you.
Also to add, Imali, Nigeria is like, I don't know if it's the only African country that is feeling this firsthand right now. We've had a 39.5% surge in fuel prices. Everything has literally gone up by at least almost double the price. We are moving towards that. So yeah, who knows? Maybe we are all going back to the Stone Age at this point, but hopefully not. And hopefully our governments are also able to do something about this.
Definitely, we're hopeful. Thank you very much, Imali. Thank you very much, Amidat. And for real, these are very important conversations that we need to be having, because where we say that, oh, it's none of my business, I don't have anything to do with it, I'm sorted. You never just can tell when it is your community in focus. So this is time for us to act through your pen. You have the stories, you have access to some of these communities, you know some of these women firsthand, or you probably have allies in some communities as well who can help you tell these stories or give you access to these women. So let's try as much as possible in our daily operations and our stories. Let's focus on more women. If there's anything that I have etched in my work practice when it comes to including women in conversation, when I'm in doubt, 50-50. If I'm speaking to, if I have to speak to a man for a conversation as a resource person, there has to be a woman there. There just has to be a woman there, because we understand that if we keep having to platform certain people, they are always going to speak from their own point of view. And that's the conversation we're still having. Let me use Nigeria as an example. In our political spaces, you go to some houses, some state government, no female representation, or maybe one or two just for the sake of, oh, we're being progressive. They do that. But when it's time to have the conversations, you get to see that just one woman or two women will not be able to champion this cause and explain it to the men in the way that they get to buy into it and make it implementable. But when we have more women coming out to air their voices, tell their own stories, there's definitely going to be a change. And you can just start with those of us on this call, and you take it intentionally to say, in this quarter, I'm going to do more in telling women's stories. I'm going to focus on more women. I'm going to spotlight women in your editorials, your feature stories, whatever it is you're doing. It's either you have a woman as your final editor, or you have a woman who is being interviewed for the story, or she's giving you her own opinion or thoughts. One way or the other, just include a woman today. That's all we're saying. And in this this call here, where we're having to look at the intersection of gender, journalism, and climate, I mean, so much has been said, and would also be sharing the slides that we have discussed on this call with you. Please subscribe to our newsletters. Look out for your inbox, look out for your spam inbox as well, so you might just be getting them. And in the chat box, we have shared with you our different social media handles. Please do well to follow. We're very fluid when it comes to conversation. So in case you know somebody who's probably thinking, talking about climate change, climate justice and all can be boring, it's not. You're welcome to our world, where we make it very easy and flexible for you to pick up on. So yes, follow us on all our social media platforms. And of course, you'd always get updates from us. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for your time. It's really, it's been an amazing time being here. We have a comment just before we go from Lucky Abeng. Okay, Lucky says, very sad reality. The realities also, I think, do not match. Africa, they say, holds about 60% of energy potentials. The West literally depends on Africa for their economic survival. Yet, when they, in quote, the West, decide to fight a fight that doesn't involve Africa, Africa suffers the most. Maybe for too long, we have focused too much on intellectual conversation. Perhaps it is time for us to start a different kind of conversation. Kudos to our women leading these topics. Happy Women's Month. Yeah, thank you. There's this comment also from Eunice Aqua. Says, I came in late, so sorry. It's understandable, it's a weekday. But I want to ask, what are some organizations one can join to get hands-on experience in climate, gender awareness, and action? Okay, I mean, as I see your hands, you have your hands up. Okay, please go ahead and we'll come back to Eunice.
Thank you so much, Esther. I just wanted to add, by the way, Lucky is my colleague, by the way.
Oh, great. Great.
I just wanted to add to what he said, and I think to put it shortly, this is just colonialism in its finest form. We think we are free, but we are actually not free. We are just, I don't know, should I say modernized slaves? Because surely, everything that has happened or everything that is happening will surely in world politics always has an effect on us, climate or not, in every other social development issue. So I think when we look at these issues, we need to start looking at it beyond world politics and start looking at it as to what it would actually take for us as Nigerians, as Africans, all Africans now, to break free from neocolonialism. And I think that might be a very long journey, but unless that conversation actually starts happening, and we are not just looking at the statistics of the war of Iraq, Israel, US, they are surely the world powers. They've shown that time after time, and that will probably not change to the end of time. But what can also change is our own systems and our own dynamics that makes us stand firm enough and not always be in a position where the outcomes or the actions or the inactions of other world powers affect us this much. More particularly Nigerians, it's affecting us so badly, both internally and externally. And it's just, we truly need to have more conversations that are now focused on how we can build a system. I'm not going to say a resilient system now, because it now feels like that is just the buzzword that we just always throw around, but how we are going to be the next generation that have a system that is solid enough to stand its footing across social development problems, across climate issues, across gender issues, across politics and every other thing, where their problems will no longer directly become our problems. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Amida. So responding to Lucky, Imali says, Lucky, unfortunately, most of our resources are processed in the Gulf, making Africa highly dependent on the global north and Gulf for energy. The oil in Kenya is processed in Saudi Arabia, so we have it on ground, but it is refined abroad. Same with Nigeria and Equatorial Guinea. So what this says again is, as a continent, Africa as a continent, and not having to look inward into the countries as well, there is so much work that we need to do. Yes, we need to move past having the theoretical conversations and having our hands soiled in making these things happen. But some of these things are not things that you do like on the micro level. It has to be done on the macro level. And we know when it comes to the African continent, when it comes to politics and sustainability, we are getting there. Let's be positive. Let's be progressive. We're getting there, and we really hope that a lot of things will change over time. And just maybe we might just be the change that we look forward to achieving. Also, having to talk about Eunice's question, I will pose that to you, Amida, because I see Eunice is Nigerian, I guess. So Eunice says, what are some organization one can join to get hands-on experience in climate, gender awareness and action? Amida, are there any you can recommend? Imali, if you have also, you can put in the chat box so other people can get to benefit from them.
Oh, there are 1,001. I mean, we are on one platform right now. You can also join. Exactly, we are on one platform right now. You can also join the Green Faith. You know what? I think I would drop my contact and we'll speak more from here. But surely there are so many organizations that you can be a part of where we are championing climate justice, gender justice, human rights, and everything in between.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Thank you very much. So Eunice, you can also follow our work on social media. We've dropped in the chat box our different social media handles. Put on your notification and you'd always get updated on our different works and different stories when we do. It's been an amazing time hosting this conversation. I mean, having to speak to people and also get to learn as well. I mean, we learn every day. Thank you so much to Imali. Thank you so much, Sami, that's for your time. And thank you to our participants as well. Thank you for your questions and for your audience. We know, I mean, time is money. In Nigeria, we say time now money. So yes, it's worth it. Thank you so much. And be sure to subscribe to our newsletters as we have more information coming your way. And we'll also get to share the slides with you as well. Thank you very much. Do have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Esther. Please feel free to share my email address. I'm happy to. Bye.
Thank you, Esther, for moderating this very insightful conversation. Thank you for bringing West and East Africa together.
Thank you.
And thank you to all our participants as well. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.